What happens when America's sweetheart, Kelly Clarkson, finds herself in the most uncomfortable interview of her career? What began as a simple, routine morning show appearance quickly spiraled into chaos that left viewers stunned and studio executives scrambling. It all started with an innocent question about her personal life. A question that triggered a confrontation so tense that Kelly Clarkson ultimately walked off the Today Show set, leaving host Craig Melvin speechless and producers in a panic. The morning had started like any other at NBC Studios in New York City. Kelly Clarkson, fresh off another successful season of her talk show, was there for a standard promotional interview to discuss her latest album, upcoming tour dates, and her thriving career as a television host. The atmosphere in the studio was upbeat, with crew members chatting casually as they prepared for what was expected to be another cheerful, feel-good segment. Kelly arrived in high spirits, greeting everyone warmly and sharing a few jokes with the makeup artists and production assistants. Known for her down-to-earth personality, she immediately brought positive energy to the room. Craig Melvin, prepared and professional as always, reviewed his notes and seemed genuinely excited to chat with one of America's most beloved entertainers. When they finally settled into their chairs on the iconic Today Show set, the bright lights illuminated their familiar smiles. The cameras rolled and everything began smoothly. Creig opened with his signature warmth, introducing Kelly with genuine enthusiasm and praising her recent accomplishments. "Kelly, it's always such a pleasure to have you here," he said with a smile. "You've been absolutely killing it with your talk show, and now you've got this incredible new album. Tell us about the inspiration behind these new songs." Kelly's face lit up as she spoke passionately about her creative process and how her personal experiences influenced her music. She discussed collaborating with different songwriters and described how this album represented a new chapter in her life. "The thing about this album," she said, gesturing expressively, "is that it really captures where I am right now. I wanted to be completely honest about my experiences, both the good and the challenging moments. Music has always been my way of processing everything." The conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and genuine connection. For the first several minutes, everything was perfect. But then the tone shifted. Creig leaned forward slightly, his smile still in place but his question edging into more personal territory. "Now I have to ask," he began. "Your fans are always curious about your personal life. You've been pretty open about your divorce and how that affected you. How are you handling everything now? Are you seeing anyone special?" Kelly's smile didn't fade immediately, but something subtle changed in her demeanor. She hesitated for just a beat before answering. "You know, Creig, I'm in a really good place right now," she replied, her voice still warm but with an undercurrent of tension. "I'm focused on my kids, my career, and just taking things one day at a time. I think that's the healthiest approach for me right now." Creig either didn't notice the slight edge in her tone or chose to ignore it. "That's wonderful to hear," he continued smoothly. "There have been some rumors lately about you and a certain someone. Any truth to those stories?" Kelly's expression stiffened. Her usual warmth cooled as she replied firmly, "I prefer to keep my private life private." "Creig, I think my fans understand and respect that boundary." It was a polite but unmistakable warning to move on. Most hosts would have taken the hint. But Creig pressed again, still smiling. "Of course, I completely understand wanting privacy, but your fans love you. They want to see you happy. Surely you can give us just a little hint about what makes Kelly Clarkson happy these days outside of work." For a split second, the atmosphere in the studio changed. Kelly's jaw tightened, her hands clasped together in her lap. Though she maintained composure, her body language spoke volumes. "What makes me happy?" she repeated slowly, her tone now cool and deliberate. "What makes me happy is being able to come on shows like this and talk about my music and my career, without having every aspect of my personal life dissected for entertainment value." Her words hung heavy in the air. Creig shifted slightly in his chair, unsure of how to recover, while producers behind the cameras exchanged nervous glances. What was meant to be a cheerful morning chat had turned into a moment of raw tension on live television, one that would soon make headlines across the country. The tension in the studio was now unmistakable. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that the once friendly interview had taken a sharp and uncomfortable turn. Yet Craig Melvin seemed either oblivious to the rising discomfort or unwilling to back down from what he clearly thought was a moment. He gave a nervous chuckle and said, Kelly, I think you might be reading too much into this. We're just having a friendly conversation here. Your fans tune in because they care about you as a person, not just as a performer. Kelly's eyes flashed, not with amusement, but with restrained anger. Though her voice remained calm, the firmness beneath it was impossible to miss. And I appreciate that support, Craig, I really do. But caring about someone doesn't mean they're entitled to know every detail of their private life. Her response was measured, but the chill in her tone made it clear she was drawing a line. The conversation had shifted from lighthearted to tense, and both participants were now clearly at odds. Creig, perhaps misunderstanding the depth of her irritation, pressed on. "I'm not asking for every detail," he said, his tone growing slightly defensive. "I'm asking basic questions that any celebrity would expect in an interview. This is what you signed up for when you became a public figure." Kelly's expression hardened, her composure slipping for the first time. "What I signed up for," she countered sharply, "was to promote my album and talk about my work. I didn't sign up to justify my personal choices or provide gossip fodder for people who think my private life is their entertainment." The once warm atmosphere in the studio had evaporated completely. Creig looked momentarily taken aback by her pointed response, but rather than de-escalate, he pushed forward, his professional smile faltering. "Kelly, I think you're being a little defensive here," he said carefully. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I'm doing my job, asking the questions our viewers want answered. You've been open about your personal struggles before, so I'm not sure why this topic is suddenly off limits." Kelly's patience was wearing thin. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, and her voice, though steady, carried a sharp edge. "There's a difference," she said coolly, "between choosing to share your struggles to help other people and having someone push you to reveal things you're not ready to discuss. I thought you would understand that distinction." The crew could sense the growing storm. Camera operators continued filming, but several staff members looked visibly uncomfortable. The interview was supposed to wrap up soon, yet neither Kelly nor Creig seemed ready to yield. It had become a battle of wills, one playing out live before millions. "Look," Creig began, attempting to sound reasonable, "I respect your right to privacy, but you have to admit that when you put yourself out there as a public figure, especially someone who hosts a talk show, where you discuss personal topics with guests, people are naturally curious about your own life." Kelly's eyes narrowed. Her next words came out slow and deliberate, her voice dangerously calm. "So because I create a safe space for my guests to share their stories, that means I've somehow forfeited my own right to boundaries? That's an interesting perspective, Creig." "That's not what I'm saying at all," Creig replied quickly, clearly rattled by her tone. "I'm just saying you can't expect people not to be interested in your personal life when your whole brand is built around being relatable and authentic." Kelly leaned forward slightly, her voice gaining strength and conviction. "My brand, as you call it, is built on being genuine about my experiences, when I choose to share them. It's about respecting people, connecting with them authentically. It's not about feeding public curiosity, just because they want to be entertained by my personal business." The tension was now unbearable. Crew members exchanged alarmed looks, and someone off camera could be heard whispering urgently into a headset, likely relaying updates to producers in the control room. Creig seemed to realize he had gone too far, but pride, or perhaps panic, kept him from backing down. "I understand your position, Kelly," he said, his voice tight. "But I have to be honest. This kind of reaction to simple questions about your personal life is going to make people wonder what you're trying to hide." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, the studio fell silent. Then Kelly's face flushed and her eyes blazed with fury, barely contained behind her steady voice. "What I'm trying to hide?" she repeated incredulously. "Creig, what I'm trying to do is maintain some semblance of normalcy for my children and myself. What I'm trying to do is have relationships that aren't scrutinized and dissected by strangers. What I'm trying to do," she said, her voice trembling with restrained anger, "is be a human being who happens to be famous, not a famous person who's forgotten how to be human." Her words cut through the air like glass. The room went still. Creig sat frozen, his usual composure slipping entirely as he realized just how far the interview had spiraled beyond recovery. Creig shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier confidence dissolving as he finally seemed to realize he had gone too far. "Kelly, I didn't mean to suggest," he began, but Kelly cut him off, her voice rising slightly. No, let me finish. The tremor in her tone wasn't anger alone, it was exhaustion, frustration, and deep hurt. You want to know what I'm hiding? She said, her words sharp and raw. I'm hiding the fact that sometimes I cry in my car after interviews like this because I feel like I can't win. If I share too much, I'm accused of oversharing for publicity. If I try to keep things private, I'm accused of being secretive or difficult. Her voice cracked slightly as she went on. I'm hiding the fact that my kids sometimes ask me why strangers on the internet think they have a right to comment on every aspect of our lives. The studio fell heavy with silence. The raw emotion in her voice was palpable, and several crew members looked visibly uncomfortable, realizing they were witnessing a deeply personal moment unfold live. Craig's expression shifted from defensive to remorseful, but the damage had already been done. Kelly continued, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm hiding the fact that I sometimes wonder if this career is worth the cost. If having to justify my basic human need for privacy is the price I have to pay for doing what I love. You have a family, Creig. Would you want every detail of your personal relationships analyzed and judged by millions of people? Creig opened his mouth to respond, but Kelly wasn't finished. Her voice rose again, now filled with a mixture of anger and pain. And you know what else I'm hiding? I'm hiding how disappointed I am right now. I've always respected you as a journalist and as a person. I thought you understood the difference between legitimate journalism and gossip mongering. I thought you knew me well enough to recognize when you were crossing a line. The studio was completely still except for the low hum of cameras and the faint buzz from the control room beyond the glass. Creig looked shaken, his face pale under the harsh studio lights, finally grasping the gravity of his misstep. Kelly, I think maybe I misunderstood, he said quietly. But Kelly's response came cold and cutting. No, Creig, you understood perfectly, she said, her voice now dangerously calm. You just chose to prioritize what you thought would make good television over basic human decency. You pushed someone who was clearly uncomfortable because you wanted a moment people would talk about. She paused, looked directly into the camera, and then turned back to him. Well, congratulations, Creig, you got your moment. People will definitely be talking about this. Craig's face drained of color. He looked utterly lost for words, his voice faltering as he tried to recover. Kelly, I never intended. Your intentions don't matter as much as your actions, she interrupted firmly. And your actions today showed me that you're willing to make your guests uncomfortable for the sake of content. That's not the journalist I thought you were, and it's not the person I thought you were. Her words hit him like a blow. Creig leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken, realizing that not only had he damaged his relationship with Kelly Clarkson, but he had done so in front of millions of viewers. The cameras were still rolling. I think, Kelly said, rising from her chair, that this interview is over. Creig stared up at her, stunned, panic flashing across his face as the full reality sank in. Not just for him, but for everyone in the studio. This was live television, and one of America's most beloved entertainers was about to walk off the Today Show set. Kelly, please, he said, his voice stripped of confidence, almost pleading. Can we just take a breath here? Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you sit back down and we can start over? Kelly looked down at him with an expression of weary disbelief. Start over, Creig? She said quietly. You can't just reset a conversation like it's a computer program. You can't unsay the things you said or undo the way you made me feel. That's not how relationships work, and it's not how respect works. Craig's desperation was now plain. Look, he said, I admit I may have pushed a little too hard, but that's just good journalism. Sometimes you have to ask the tough questions to get to the truth. Kelly's laugh was short, bitter, and humorless. The truth? She repeated. What truth were you trying to get to, Creig? Whether or not I'm dating someone. How exactly would that information serve your audience? Or were you just hoping I'd give you something juicy to boost your ratings? By now, several crew members had stopped working entirely, frozen in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Someone off camera could be heard whispering frantically into a headset, likely seeking direction from the control room. That's not fair, Creig protested weakly, his composure gone. Now you're making this about ratings when it's about connecting with our audience. People relate to you because you've been open about your struggles. They want to know how you're doing. But Kelly only shook her head, her expression one of pure disappointment. The emotional distance between them was now unbridgeable, and the entire studio could feel it. Kelly shook her head slowly, her voice now carrying a quiet sadness that felt even heavier than her earlier anger. People relate to me because I choose to share my struggles in a way that helps them feel less alone, she said. I share my experiences when I'm ready, in my own space, on my own terms. What you were trying to do was extract information from me like I was some kind of resource to be mined for content. Her movements were calm but deliberate as she began removing the small microphone clipped to her jacket. There's a difference between authentic connection and exploitation, she continued firmly, and apparently you can't see that difference. Creig stood up abruptly, panic flickering across his face as he realized how bad this looked. Kelly, you're being dramatic, he said quickly. This is television. This is what we do. We ask questions, people answer them, and everyone moves on. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime. Kelly paused, looking at him with deep disappointment. A crime? No, Creig, but you did commit something. A betrayal of trust. You took someone who came here in good faith, who trusted you to treat them with basic respect, and you decided that your agenda was more important than their comfort or dignity. Her words hit him like a blow. Creig's face went from confusion to guilt to shame. Kelly, that wasn't my intention, he said weakly. I keep hearing about your intentions, Kelly replied, setting her microphone down on the chair, but intentions without consideration for impact are meaningless. You intended to do your job, but you didn't think about how your approach might affect me as a human being. You wanted good content, but you didn't think about the cost of that content to the person providing it. She looked around the silent studio, her eyes meeting those of the crew members who stood frozen, witnessing a moment that was quickly becoming historic. You know what the saddest part is? She continued softly. I actually like doing interviews. I like connecting with people and talking about my work, but experiences like this make me want to retreat, to stop being accessible, to build walls instead of bridges. Creig's voice was barely a whisper now. Please don't let one bad interview change how you approach everything else. Kelly's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Creig, this isn't about one bad interview. It's about a pattern of behavior, one that treats celebrities like they're not real people with real feelings and boundaries. It's about a culture that thinks fame means consent to invasion of privacy. She began walking toward the edge of the set, her steps steady and deliberate. Creig followed her helplessly, searching for something to say that could undo what had been done. What do I tell our viewers? He called after her. How do I explain this? Kelly stopped and turned back to him one last time. Tell them the truth, Creig. Tell them you pushed someone past their comfort zone for the sake of entertainment and they chose to prioritize their self-respect over your show. Tell them that when you don't respect people's boundaries, they walk away. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. Tell them that being famous doesn't mean being available for consumption 24 hours a day. Tell them that celebrities are human beings who deserve the same courtesy and respect as anyone else. Creig stood frozen, speechless. Kelly took a deep breath, her final words ringing through the silent studio. And tell them I hope this serves as a reminder that the people they watch on television, the ones who try to bring them joy, are real people with real families and real struggles. We're not characters in a story that exists for their amusement. With that, Kelly Clarkson walked off the Today Show set, leaving Craig Melvin standing under the harsh glare of the studio lights, surrounded by stunned crew members and the heavy silence of what had just occurred. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of Craig's visible distress as he tried to compose himself. For several long moments he stood motionless, realizing the full weight of what had happened, and that nothing about this day, or his reputation, would ever be quite the same again. Emo? What do you think really pushed Kelly over the edge? Was it Craig's persistence, his dismissive attitude, or something deeper about how celebrities are treated in our culture? Subscribe for more stories like this and share in the comments what you think was the real breaking point in this unforgettable confrontation.